welcome to Access Magic. I am joined by two gentlemen who don't really need any introduction, but I'm gonna give them one anyway. This is Mark Rosewater, who is the head designer of Magic. Welcome. And Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic the Gathering. Welcome to the show, guys.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. So we're heading back to Dominaria, of course.
We are. Exciting.
Which is very, very exciting. It's been about, 60 years in game. And it's also the 25th anniversary of Magic.
Can you believe Magic is 25 years old?
No, that's quite a shock.
Yeah,
almost as much of a shock as 60 years in game, which I thought was like, wow, it's been longer than I thought.
So, of course, it's a long time, and I think it'd be great to go back and kind of talk about what the origin of Magic the Gathering is, how you sort of thought of the game and what brought it to where it is today.
The concept of Magic was one of my few eureka moments in game design, and that was the eureka of not all players have to have the same deck. And it was such a radical idea for me that I didn't even know if you could construct such a game. Maybe a couple months after that, I had something which looked similar to Magic as it is today.
Awesome.
Which came first? The concept of the trading card game came first, or the concept of everything is different came first?
Everything is different came first.
Okay.
One of the things I think that was in my head when I started thinking about that idea was I love to modify games, make new rules for them, see how that plays, and cards are wonderful for doing that because you add a new card to your deck and you've really made a new game.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that really excited me about this idea of everybody making their own deck was it was sharing with people that deck construction, that game design aspect that I like. They are constructing their own game experience.
Right. And when did the wrapping of Magic and fantasy come into the game? Did you start that way? Was it always part of the pairing?
No, it actually, the fantasy Magic came a few weeks later. In the interim, I had a safe cracking game, I think, and I had some abstract games.
Safe cracking the Gathering.
A few weeks later, I had this card game floating around that I'd been working on a long time, which was a Magic-themed game, and already had this sort of rich lore that I had developed over years with 5 colors of Magic and a relationship between the lands and the spells. And so I grabbed that and started working with that, and that is what the roots of Magic were.
And now, 25 years later, it has...
I love hearing these stories because I don't know all this stuff. So.
Right. And it's also wild to think about how far it's come, and now there are whole civilizations with deep, rich histories that, you're revisiting a place that, again, is 60 years since we've been there in game, and it's really cool to see where it started. And Mark, of course, you've been with Magic for many, many years, almost as long.
Almost as long, not quite as long as Richard.
Right.
I started playing Magic when it came out in 1993, in the summer of 93. Wizards had a magazine at the time called The Duelist, which was all about Magic. And I approached them with an idea for a puzzle column. I really liked in-game puzzles.
Right.
And so I thought the magazine needed more advanced content because the first one that came out was geared more toward beginners and I wanted some more advanced stuff. So I wrote to the editor and I said, here's an idea, here's a puzzle. And then they did it, they printed it in issue 1.5. And then I started freelancing for Wizards, and eventually I was up at Wizards doing some freelance thing, and I said, I'd be willing to move here, and they're like, when can you start? And then, boom. So I started working full-time in 1995.
Okay.
So this October will be 23 years with the company.
Wow.
So
yeah, almost as long as Magic the Gathering.
Yes.
And you two worked together sometime during that time, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So here's a really funny story is, so I have a blog, so I answer questions online, and someone said, would you ever have Richard on a set? I'd love to have Richard on a set. Then he said, Richard wants to be on, just have him call me, I'd love to have Richard on a set. And then somebody at work said, oh, I had met Richard a year ago or something, and I was asking him whether he wanted to be on Magic set. He goes, oh, I'd love to. If Mark ever wants to be on Magic set, just call me up. And he's like, I think you guys both want to work together.
You were ships in the night.
So,
yeah.
And then I knew we were doing Dominaria. I'm like, 25th anniversary, Magic's home. So it seemed like the perfect fit for Richard. So I think I called him up the next day. And I said, okay, Richard, do you want to be on a set? And he goes, yes. And I go, wait, let me tell you what the set is. He goes, oh, I'd like to do it. And he's like, well, no, it's really cool. It's going to be Magic's 20th anniversary.
He's like, you had me at hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it sort of fits, right? Because you guys have such a rich history, and Magic has such a rich history, and now we're coming back to Dominaria, and the theme of Dominaria kind of is history.
Yes. Well, here's one of the challenges of doing Dominaria is one of the things we like to do is we like worlds of identity.
Right.
Innistrad is the Gothic horror world. Ravnica is a city world. Theros is a Greek mythology world. That our worlds have a definition, they mean something, and then when I mention it to you, you know what to expect.
Right.
But Dominaria, I mean, the first 10 years of Magic, most of the sets were on Dominaria. So like, is it Jungle World? Is it Ice World? Is it Post-Apocalyptic World? It's all of those. And so how do you go back and have a singular feel to the world but yet capture all the history of the world?
Right.
And we went in circles and finally we said, you know what's unique about this world is the history.
Right.
The fact that so much happened here. And obviously, it happened within the context of the world, but it happened within the context of the game.
Right.
Like when I mentioned the invasion, the Phyrexian invasion, players know that. They lived through it. They played it. It was a set called Invasion, right? It's not just some thing that happened to the people of the world. It happened to the players as well.
Right.
And we really wrapped around the idea of history as being the center point, that this is a world that its history drives what it is.
Right.
When we had made the Planeswalkers, the early version of the Planeswalkers, the way they worked is turn 1, they did something. Turn 2, they did something. Turn 3, they did something. And then turn 4, they go back to turn 1. So when we said, we're going to tell stories, I remembered that. I'm like, that's kind of cool, some sort of sequential thing. But I was really concerned because there's a lot of words. Is there a way to do this that didn't take up so much words?
Right.
And so Richard, actually, why don't you take over here? This is when you went home and sort of brainstormed.
Yeah, when I first heard the idea, I thought of a board game, and I thought you could put a little board on it where you advance a pawn, and you could condense a lot of the words out by having it so you have icons which are repeated. So one of the early examples we came up with was the Tale of the Huntsman, which the first turn would be create a wolf, second turn create a wolf, third turn create 2 wolves, fourth turn create 2 wolves, and then all the wolves are destroyed because that's what the Huntsman does.
Right.
And another one was the Tale of Near Defeat, and that one, it only advances when you've got less life than your opponent. And you have to have less life several turns in a row. Then you have to have less than 5 life. And then you win the game.
Oh, wow.
So,
One of the cool things, we experiment with a whole bunch of things. Early in design, the way it works is when we're trying something, we're just trying lots of different versions. So can I show the finished version?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, is there card
So they're called sagas. Okay, and sagas are they're stories of the past.
Right.
So let's show the first one is called History of Benalia. Okay, the first thing you'll know when you look at the card is it looks different. It does not look like a normal Magic card.
Right.
So there's an art. The art is sort of a column, and so it represents the story, but through a neat lens. It's not just the actual story like we would show on a normal Magic card. It's the story told through the art of the world.
Right.
So for example, this is about the history of Benalia, the founding of Benalia. And so how would you learn about the founding of Benalia? Where would they tell that story? In the stained glass at the churches.
Right.
You know, Benalia has all these churches, and like that's a neat way they would show their history.
Right.
So there's 14 different saga cards. Each one has a different kind of art that's representing the story that it is telling.
Right.
So now, you pay 1 white. You'll notice on the left side, there's 3 chapters. So when you play the card, the first chapter happens right away. You put a counter on the card to represent what chapter you're on, and right away you get an effect. You get chapter 1 right away. Then on the beginning of the next turn, you put another counter on it. Now you're chapter 2, and chapter 2 happens. Now on Benalia, the history of Benalia, chapter 1 and chapter 2 are the same thing. That's not always true, but in this card, chapter 1, chapter 2 do the same thing. And then the next turn, chapter 3, now all of them get +2, +1. So the idea is, the history of the story was a horrible thing had happened, they'd fallen apart, they were in disarray, and little by little, people started coming, the knights started coming up, and that there were individual knights at first, so it's making individual knights, but then the knights came together. And that they realized that by banding together, they could form Benalia.
Right.
And so that's telling the story of the founding of Benalia.
Right.
But the neat thing about it is, it's telling the story through a lens that you, while playing the game, are living the story.
Right.
And that's what the thing we wanted is, we wanted to represent stories, but in a way that's tactical, that's a part of the game.
Right.
Because Magic shines when what we're doing, like what you're playing in the game, matches the flavor we're trying to capture.
Right, exactly.
So you get to live through the stories.
Right. So the history of Benalia in particular is a very triumphant story,
Yes.
right? So there are also sagas that maybe depict something a little less triumphant, a little less happy, maybe. The Fall of the Thran being one of them.
Yes. The Fall of the Thran begins out chapter 1, Armageddon, all your lands go away. It begins out very destructive.
Right.
But then chapter 2 and chapter 3, both you and your opponent get to bring 2 lands in, so you have a slow rebuild.
Right, which is sort of thematic of kind of Dominaria in general, right? There's this sort of theme of rebirth and a lot of the art and stuff like that.
And there's another mechanic in the set called historic. So I talked about we wanted to represent the history of the world. So what historic does, it says, I care about history, but in game terms. Well, what does that mean in game terms? Well, I care about the people, so the legendary things I care about. I care about the objects, so the artifacts I care about. And I care about the stories, so it cares about sagas. So sagas tie into one of the other mechanics in the set, is that whenever you're playing a saga, in addition to playing a legendary spell or playing an artifact, you also can care about the sagas. And so historic cares about all of those. So that's another way that sagas sort of tie into the larger structure of the set.
Right, and it all sort of thematically goes under history, and the history of Dominaria.
Yes.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for spending time and talking about, the history of magic and the history of Dominaria and the history of everything.
There's a theme here.
There's a theme. Did you see the pattern? Thanks so much. I think everyone's going to be really excited to get this set.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.